anyway, it's using those different tools that are available to us, such as, so what again, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but some different methodologies for controlling weeds, or let's just say pests, or weeds, whatever, multiple ways. We know that the chemical's an option. Yeah. What's the difference between the two? Yeah, it's a tough deal, and the reason that I'm asking you that, I'm glad you said both physical and mechanical. It is right. There's some. You're gonna look, cultural control, physical control, mechanical control, obviously chemical, biological, perhaps. But it's kind of it's a tough one to separate when you're thinking about, especially like physical versus mechanical. We're talking about physical control. Our book and the test that I guess you might experience with the state is going to include or consider things like using barriers, traps, or screens, nets, things like that. They call that physical control. Whereas mechanical control, strangely, is even inclusive of hand pulling weeds, but also tillage is another example of mechanical control. Let's just run on this conversation for a minute. How about cultural? What comes to mind? So culture is not being right or wrong, but differences. Okay. So in a sense, cultural control methods are, and I guess sort of by definition we could say, well, different choices in mechanical or physical control methods. We could call them cultural because they're just different ways of going about things, such as tillage. That's a bigger one where maybe minimum tillage is the tillage method that one guy likes to go about, and because of that he probably need to apply more chemical, more herbicide, because he's not out there turning the ground as much and killing weeds. That said, he's also not disrupting the soil as much, leaving the more plant matter or residue on top of the soil, leaving root structures in place. So there's a great benefit there, but there's also the negative aspect in that they're probably going to incur some more costs in chemical use. I guess where my conversation started here was this picture of a bunch of dead rats. And so, and getting back to the mistake I made yesterday, I was saying that the bubonic plague was a disease carried by the fleas, and it was. But what had happened was fleas, host or live on and feed off of rats. At least in this case, that's pretty common anyway. The rats had a disease that was able to be contracted by those fleas that were living on the rats. And then in time, those rats began dying because of this disease. The fleas didn't have the host available in the rats. And so then the fleas began looking for other hosts in human beings, and they were able to vector that disease from the rats to the people. And that's what caused the bubonic plague. And it was a long time before they figured out how the hell that happened and what was going on. But that was that plague that at that time world population was obviously a heck of a lot smaller, and decreased by about a sixth, almost 20% of world population because of what was going on in Europe. And that was where the concentration of people were at that time too. So makes sense. All right, so let me move on past that. We'll start talking about who Gary Coleman is, right? Webster. Just making sure you guys are listening. Okay, so we will get into those different methodologies, but first let's talk about those crude measures, as the book calls them, of pest control over time, or historical pest control. And I don't know that crude is the right word, but I guess maybe more labor intensive, or it might even say organic, really. I mean, this is how most folks control their weeds and pests in their gardens or small organic farming operations. Keep in the back of your mind, well, when you hear organic farming, it is not exclusive of using chemicals. Matter of fact, some organic chemicals, those organic compounds, they're not using synthetically or synthetic organics. They're using true organic compounds, less potent, but there are most definitely organic, non-synthetically created compounds found in nature that are harmful. Okay. But anyhow, getting back to those measures before chemical controls were available, things like pulling weeds by hand. My goodness, that was happening. Still is. Rodents were being clubbed. There we go. Picture of an awesome job. Traps were used. Just plucking. Folks were just looking through their crops, pulling insects, weeds, all that good stuff by hand. But burning was commonly used. Still is. Still a great method of control. There's, man, my mind just wants to take off on different tangents too much. But burning is a very effective way of maybe alleviating some worries, maybe a fungus or a virus in a field that's on the surface. Going through and burning that residue off is very effective. That said, a person can expect that they're going to lose the benefit of that organic material on top, but they're also not going to have to spray. But they might have to deal with some state laws and regulations talking about how they can burn and when they can burn and if they can at all. It's alfalfa around here used to be burned off every fall, get kind of hazy and whatnot, and in time enough complaints were heard that it's kind of a difficult thing to do anymore. All right. So pesticides or chemicals have been used for a while. 2,500 years before Christ, they started. The Sumerians were burning sulfur. The sulfur compounds were pretty effective in keeping insects out of their communities and whatnot. That's, I guess, sort of the earliest use of non-mechanical methods. Has anyone ever heard of hellebore? I got a picture of hellebore on there. Pretty little fly. How about pyrethrums, pyrethroids? Sometimes you hear about that stuff and being potentially dangerous. We've got a picture of a pyrethrum on the next slide, but I believe, any guesses or anybody know where the pyrethroid or pyrethrum compounds come from? Marigolds. Marigolds. Lesson learned. Pretty up your garden. Plant some marigolds around it. Mix them into the garden. It does do a pretty effective job of keeping a lot of insects. Aphids. Aphids are pretty well deterred by pyrethrum marigolds. Shoot this out of here. It's kind of like a gnat. White, kind of tough to see. Can't remember real sure what this is actually called. Cross at the time. But this is a surprisingly, matter of fact, I didn't know that until I started teaching this class last week, that marigolds could be so effective. But I did try that. Around tomatoes was last year. I was out teaching, they got beat up pretty bad. So I planted some marigolds, and I did not have those little white gnats and chewed up They, initially, I'm just looking at these leaves because it just reminded me that initially I was seeing some pretty good damage to the marigolds themselves. And then just a little tidbit of my own experience using this stuff. How about neem oil? Has anybody ever heard of using neem oil as an organic controlled substance? Neem is it's an extract from evergreen, or neem is an evergreen species. Pretty popular stuff if you're looking in the organic section of the grocery store, but you know it's not so cost prohibitive when I'm doing things like walking around plucking insects and using marigolds and whatnot. But to plant marigolds out in a wheat crop around here, maybe aphids could be a problem. But that's my most folks are to take up some of their ground or to walk their feet. There's no way in hell that I can control, say, 40-acre bean field last year by plucking things out by hand or walking around with little bomb bread. That said, every time I was out there with a pipe, I was always looking for insects. I was always, if I was come across a weed, I told the guys that were helping me out, pull that damn weed and get it up. It shocked me as an agronomist to walk a field with a grower and walk past it, for him to walk past it. I'm not happy about spraying. Walking along. Another one. It's like, just pull the damn weed, you know? I'm not saying that that's going to control, you know, the weed population throughout that whole field, but that one plant, just going to walk past it, let the thing go to seed, potentially, even if we do get a spray application in that field, it's not guaranteed to be effective, but I guarantee this tool right here isn't effective. So, it just, mix it and match it up, you know, just take some different methods of going about things. All right, so contemporary current concerns in using pesticides. Resistance is a big one. I guess we brought this up a little bit yesterday, maybe the day before. Anybody know some methods for reducing the possibility of resistance? We talked about the word of resistance and how many weeds have become resistant to Roundup in time. They're adjusting their compound mixture a little bit so that it's a little bit of variation so that resistance is less likely to develop or continue to develop as quickly. But so thinking about how resistance occurs and that it doesn't happen within a population, a generation, you know, with maybe one or two being unharmed because of the just random genetic mutation or difference, and they're able to increase the population. That gene pool was able to increase the population well. What if in our tank mix that includes Roundup, say we were to throw another chemical with a different mode of action? Then that resistant weed, they got sprayed by Roundup and care less, is killed by the other chemical that we have that we're doing. So that's one. So mixing chemicals is a big one. Crop rotation, great one.
Crop rotation because then especially if you're doing like corn, and we got sugar beets and you put corn after it, so you got broadleaf grass. So you come in and spray your mixing chemical beet bolter. Come in and spray the beet bolter, you can kill that.
See it. Okay.
So,
Beet bolter?
Yeah, it's called a bolter. It's basically a beet in your chemical.
Oh, it bolted. Went to seed. I got you. Okay. Okay.
Bolter. So that, you eliminate that factor. A lot of problems in our area with alfalfa. That's one thing.
The should or should not.
Should not. Because stays in for several years, the bees come in and pollinate it, fly across, pollinate another plant, pollination can become resistant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
We have, in here, especially now, we sold a lot, we exported a lot of hay this year.
so you weren't growing Roundup Ready.
We don't,
Right.
we're gonna trade our neighbors do.
Mm-hmm.
And, whenever they were doing the trade actors between, countries and stuff, some official told them that there's zero Roundup Ready alfalfa pollen.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you have a trace, your haystack, they'll come through and pump it. And a lot of times, you go through and test a haystack, they'll test positive for Roundup, and go through and test the same haystack, and it'll be just matter.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I tested it, it really screws things up, but
So what happens if, I guess
they don't take it.
you're just not going to take it? I mean, that's a done deal.
You're not gonna, you can't export to China, or Japan, or wherever you want.
Sweet. So what do you
Export means we find someone.
got? Just so, okay. Yeah, I was talking to John Dodd that runs Forage Genetics out there in Tushy, and they're all about alfalfa studies. They're growing different varieties, salt-tolerant varieties, Roundup-ready varieties, across the board. We were saying, it is virtually impossible to have zero tolerance or zero incidence of the Roundup Ready gene.
It's just it's a hard plant to kill as it is. If you go to spray it out or get rid of it, for your crop rotation, and take out alfalfa.
Yeah.
Hard enough it is to kill the plant. One of your best killers is Roundup.
Sure.
And you make that resistance. Now you got a field that you can't get rid of.
Yeah. Great. And I mean, very important. Like not only to the economy in that aspect, but just the increased possibility of resistance. Yeah, trying to figure that out. But what he's getting at, from the difficulty, and so you're growing a crop that's Roundup. Well, first off, so that alfalfa is probably going to stay for 3 to 5 years, something like that. So each year, of course, to control the weeds in that field, we're spraying it with Roundup Ready chemicals. Now, I'd say, of course, you're growing Roundup Ready, or if someone is growing a Roundup Ready alfalfa or any Roundup Ready crop, it's still a damn good idea. You should absolutely be mixing your chemicals, going after it for spraying or different like that. Because continually using Roundup, that's likely to lead to resistance. But doing that for 3 to 5 years in the same field, the same crop, then going into another crop. Now, one, almost guaranteed there's going to be some pollen here, which is just sort of that leftover, maybe some seed or plants left in the ground. Alfalfa is a perennial crop, so you basically, if it's not killed out, it'll be removed, which just really isn't going to happen, no matter how much you work the field. That's the deal. You're going to have some Roundup on your next crop. Which you're going to talk about, I'm sorry, alfalfa. Next crop. Alfalfa is Roundup is no longer an option. You can't spray out the Roundup Ready alfalfa, right? So, I will say that the seed growers are giving them a premium to grow Roundup Ready, mainly because of some difficulties they're going to face in the future. But
I love Roundup Ready. It's a lot of times, through corn and stuff, that you can take the crop and kill it, get rid of it year after year.
Mhm.
Alfalfa, weeds, and only a lot of weeds off of it.
Yeah.
So I think alfalfa is one of those. If you're cut alfalfa constantly, you should be able to clean your weeds out anyway.
Sure.
Through cut, of course, seed not, but
there. And then that crop rotation aspect he's talking about to avoid resistance. So it's, with alfalfa, it's told it's going to be in the ground for a few years. Let's say we're picking another crop, corn or wheat, hay, say some kind of grass, to rotate into broccoli, say something like peas, soybean, or sheep. And it's not really always the easiest thing to do, because a lot of times, damn near every time you grow something, it's because you're growing because there's a buying it. Well, if you're growing on a commercial scale, say in this area, if you want to grow peas, the only person you can do that for, there's two. Smith Rosen Foods, that I don't have the greatest things to say about my interaction with them, or Seneca. There's about two options. Well, neither one of them are great companies, but these companies do know the importance of rotation, so they kind of feel like, it is in that grower's best interest to grow this crop or rotate out of this current crop. So that's sort of a leverage tool that they have. And also, there's benefit to rotate with a legume like a pea, because then we end up with a little bit of free nitrogen. We can break the disease cycle because we're rotating crops. So there's reason to do it, but a lot of times it's just you're doing it more for the time of year. And so adopting these practices, my point is that it's not always the most economically. So we'll just say it's not always the easiest thing. Okay, so the first documented crop that was resistant or I guess it showed resistance. It wasn't actually the crop, it was scale. And that was way back in the early 1900s. Since then, technology's evolved and we're using more chemicals. There is significantly, that's a picture of that scale, but all of a sudden that little feller wasn't dying anymore when they went out there with another application of lime and sulfur. Today, there are over 500 insect species that are resistant to chemicals. Nearly 200, and I would say at this point there are 200 weed species. I think it's 20, maybe. About 200 weed species are resistant, and then over 100 insect species just here in the United States. Anyone ever, anybody know what that guy is? Yeah. Colorado potato beetle. That thing, different populations around the country, it's shown resistance to every single mode of action. It's not saying just different areas combined. Every chemical available out there, at least in some area, has lost effectiveness. Remember that resistance is developed generationally, not within a current local population, right? Current lifespan. Crop rotations, thanks for thinking ahead when I said that. And making an application according to the label. We could mix our chemicals, rotate crops. If we make applications less than the recommended dosage, we suspect that we're going to do it. It's not going to lead to resistance again in that population, but a lesser than recommended dosage isn't going to have, there's a reason that dosage is good, and that's for effectiveness. But making, I guess, light applications, we're going to kill some of the population, much of it's going to remain, but we're still exposing that chemical over and over, and keep losing them, but it does lead to resistance a bit faster. Okay. Video.
glyphosate on this farm for probably 20 years. Glyphosate resistance on our farm.
Remember that glyphosate is the active ingredient of Roundup.
Went from a few scattered weeds one year to the next year they were taking over some fields to the point that herbicides would not kill them. Well, the first year we really had a problem with it. It was devastating. We actually had crops we had to destroy. We had to go in and either mow down or get rid of that crop to try to stop the spread of those weed seed.
My past history of herbicide use has been go in there with the glyphosate, but it worked very well until several years ago. When it started becoming less effective, it would kink the kochia up pretty good, but it would never take the kochia plant all the way down, and then it would recover within a month. We had a problem about probably 2 years ago.
In 2007, we confirmed resistance in 4 populations in western Kansas. And by 2012, we estimate that approximately 1/3 of our cropland contains glyphosate-resistant kochia. It's a little bit hard to measure the economic consequences of resistance, but we did have an agricultural economist that tried to figure out some of the costs. And in a 3-year rotation, which is commonly practiced in this part of the state, he figured that the increased input costs by at least $20 an acre.
With respect to resistance, Canadian growers and the industry in general can learn from U.S. experience, particularly glyphosate resistance, in 2 important aspects, in my opinion. The first one is to maintain their crop rotation diversity. We've seen in the United States that when they don't practice diverse crop rotation, that's when they tend to develop resistance the first. And secondly, which goes hand in hand with the first one, is maintain your herbicide diversity. In other words, mix up your herbicide modes of action within a growing season and across growing seasons, just to keep the weeds off balance. And with those 2 things, I think those are the 2 main lessons that Canadian growers and industry here can learn from the U.S. experience.
BASF recommends to use a multiple mode of action strategy. And that multiple mode of action strategy is made to delay the onset of
So this is just going to feed into an advertisement for their chemical, but
Heat and Distinct are 2 of the
this
newest
chemical that they're
innovations
trying to
BASF has brought
distinct-
the Western Canadian marketplace. They're used in conjunction with glyphosate to control the wide spectrum. of
it's a
weeds.
mix. It's just a prepackaged chemical mix. So they're still using glyphosate, but adding some other chemical compounds to it, so that essentially the same as tank
Any idea in
mixing.
your mind that you're facing resistance to glyphosate or any other herbicide, I urge you to be proactive, to rotate crops, to rotate herbicides. Glyphosate is very economical, very safe to use product. Let's take care of it to use it as long as we can.
All right. Does anybody know how long it is that the glyphosate remains active once it's been sprayed onto a crop? Believe it or not, it's pretty much inert once it's made contact with soil. If it hasn't, so basically, if it's not, if it doesn't hit the target, that there's no residual effect of glyphosate at all. It deactivates. So just one of those things. I just had to remind growers that on occasion. It's like, well, I sprayed the shit out of my field with some glyphosate, with Roundup or glyphosate, Glystar, whatever. And damn, I got weeds growing again. Weed doesn't know that glyphosate was ever there. So glyphosate, really, it's a contact herbicide, and it has to make contact with the plant. It can't be laid out there like a pre-emergent, which is a type of herbicide where we make the application sort of it's like a seal over the surface. Well, if you imagine it like that, it makes a little bit more sense. So as a weed germinates and starts to work its way up to the top of the surface, makes contact with that glyphosate. Okay. Any of you guys come across the term biomagnification when you're reading Silent Spring? Okay. So biomagnification, sort of because what I just told you about glyphosate, biomagnification has to do with things like mercury in the ocean, DDT in its time, but it's generally, so it's, persistence of chlorinated hydrocarbons such as DDT in the environment, and that's sort of an example, is what Rachel Carson was talking about. But it's because of that affinity to fatty tissues, whether that's human being, fish in the ocean, or really any creature. But once some of that is ingested, remains in the fatty tissue, it's eaten, say, that an organism containing some DDT because it's fed on something that has it. Another creature comes along, eats that organism. It's gonna add those chemical compounds to its system. They remain, and so sort of a kind of a hierarchical way of looking at that would be that by the time that this osprey eats that, or when that osprey at the top of the chain eats that fish, it's bringing in 25 parts per million, where initially zooplankton in the water were at these very low concentrations. But small fish consume a lot of this zooplankton. These larger fish consume several of these smaller fish. Blah, 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 blah. Eventually, that osprey gets hooked up with a hell of a lot more or higher of a concentration of DDT or things like mercury. All right. So back to the same video. Okay. IPM is using as many tactics as we have available to us. So sort of, I like to just consider it like one person through the front door, person through the back door. Just insurance, okay? But it is important that when we are trying to control a weed or an insect or a pest of any sort, that we don't go out there with the goal of eradicating that pest. That we manage that pest below a level that's going to cause us economic injury. One, environmentally speaking, but two, the feasibility of eradication isn't really there. So, in other words, we're going to talk about economic threshold and injury level, but what our goal needs to be is to monitor or be able to monitor our pest and know at what population or level, density level, that pest is going to cause us more harm. So we're going to lose money by the damage that pest has done, or lose more money than it would cost us to try and manage the pest. Does that make sense? So we can if I walk in my field and I see a pest insect or a pest weed, and I just say, get out there and get them. Let's go. Let's spray. Let's burn or whatever. If that costs me more than what the loss I would suffer from that pest is, then economically that makes no sense at all. Right? Okay. So the steps to an IPM program. First and foremost, know what in the hell it is that you're looking at. Identify the pest. Not only, is it helpful? You can't. I guess you could, but it might be embarrassing to call your crop consultant and say, I've got a weed. Got a weed, bro. You got to do something about that. No shit, what do you got? I don't know, man, but it's not my crop. So know what it is. If you want to kind of take some of the responsibility yourself and maybe not get handled. But so know, is that a grass? Is that a broadleaf? First and foremost, is my crop a grass or a broadleaf? What is this insect? Is it prevalent in this area? Is it coming from the neighbors? Where is it coming from? What's the life cycle of this insect? I mean, is this at adult stage, larval stage, eggs, whatever? Because that's going to have an awful lot to do with the effectiveness of your control method. Right? All right, so the second step after we define what the pest is, or identify the pest, is the second step is defining the management system. Not really the most intuitive name considering what we're talking about here, but the management system in our world right now is the location of the pest. We're going to be treating a field, treating a barn, treating a basement. If I'm going to fog my, whatever, is this a greenhouse? But different methods of control will be used based on where the pest exists, and that's our management system. That area that where the pest exists. Third step: develop a management strategy. How are we going? Is this a fumigation project we've got coming up here in the greenhouse? Or is this something that we can handle with mechanical tillage? Do we need to spray? What do we need to do? That's our strategy. After the strategy is employed, then we need to monitor, see if the effectiveness is there. And it's all stuff that makes sense, right? It's just things that we do, but right now we're trying to work certain particular. So scouting, trapping, monitoring degree days. Anybody familiar with degree days? It's basically a temperature window that is suitable for, they talk about degree days for crop growth, but also for insect development. So below, there's a lower and an upper threshold. Below that, not conducive, probably not growing. It's more of a, that crop or insect is sort of stagnant in its growth. But within that window, it's optimal, that temperature window. So degree days are just tallies, accumulations of time that's elapsed within that particular ideal growth or temperature window. So now, these are the steps, or we're calling them steps in our textbook, but really it's sort of the events that need to take place. Understandably, step one is to identify where the pest is, and what the pest is, and like where it is, but then coming up with a strategy and then monitoring. But to say that the fifth step is consider your economic threshold, I may not, if I know what my economic threshold is, I might not ever have to deploy a strategy. If I'm out there, if I'm doing a good job of tracking how much exists and how much damage I can expect. And trust me, this isn't stuff that a farmer needs to know off the top of his head, what his thresholds are, how much say insect population or weed density he can handle. But there are the crop services and extension services that are more than happy to help you out with that. But so my point is consider that economic threshold from a farmer standpoint, where margins are small and most of us are losing anyway. Know if it's going to be cost effective to deploy the strategy. So our economic threshold I'm glad that they showed a space here, but it is this is just this difference between threshold and entry level is sort of exaggerated a little bit for our point. But if I have just an existence of pests, that doesn't necessarily justify an action. It's what we talked about before, but as that pest population increases, there will come a point, and this is essentially our below that point, we're going to lose money or suffer crop damage more than the cost of controlling them. That this area right here is our threshold, okay? So it's kind of, again, it's difficult. They should probably be more or less right on top of one another. But the injury level is the point that a control method needs to take place. Or, beyond this, I would say still make the application because you're going to continue to suffer. But it's not until that point or before that economic injury level that we want to make the control. It's not, beyond that, doesn't make much sense. Down here, it doesn't make much sense. So it's kind of find that, get an idea of where that location on the threshold is, or where your economic injury level is, and where you're at. Use scouting methods. Get someone else to help you scout the field. Do the research. Figure out how much of this you could take. For how many acres it is you're growing, and what the crop value is. And it's incorporative of all of that. So it's kind of a daunting task, but so is farming or growing. Okay. We could stop there. So no class on Monday. Go over these slides a little bit if you want to. Do some reading, drink some beers, enjoy yourselves, learn something. I'll see you on Tuesday.